The B-47 Stratojet was a high-altitude subsonic nuclear-capable bomber for the United States, and it introduced a whole range of new design features, and in this video I'm going to take you on a detailed tour and point them out. The B-47 Stratojet really was one of the bigger leaps forward in aviation design. Even just the look of it was something completely revolutionary. It first flew in December 1947, which was only 6 months after the B-50's first flight, which you can see here, and while it was the best version of the B-29 Superfortress, it really looked decades older. Under this panel here was the in-flight refueling receptacle, and this capability meant that it could fly much further yet didn't require the massive fuel tanks of its predecessor, the B-36. This circular thing is the Y4 horizontal periscopic bomb sight, which the bombardier could use to bomb the sites visually or by using the radar. And above that is a warning antenna that could detect radar transmissions from any adversaries. This panel here is for the navigator bombardier's ejection seat, which fired downwards and ideally shouldn't be used below 150 meters for obvious reasons. With advances in technology, this role was carried out by a single person. In fact, there were only 3 crew in total, with the other being the pilot and the co-pilot, and those two could eject upwards. This black bulge is the radar system used for both navigation and for the bombing. Directly behind that is the entrance hatch for the pilot and the co-pilot, who sat in tandem in the bubble canopy that was great for visibility but also very hot on the ground. The tandem layout enabled thinner fuselages and cockpits, but it did inhibit communication between both pilots. The B-52 was initially designed to have the same layout, but was changed to have them sitting next to each other, as you can see in my footage in my B-52 tour. This vent here, labelled as cooling air inlet, takes in air that would be used to cool the pressurised and very hot bleed air from the starboard engines. The cockpit is pressurised, and they initially planned to have a man down in the tail gunner's position, but pressurising that was too complicated, so they gave that job to the co-pilot. Now let's check out this rather unique landing gear. An especially large bombay was needed to fit in the A-bomb, and prior to the B-47, they would mount the main landing gear under the wing. But in this case, the wings were far too thin and the engine nacelles were very small, so if they wanted to use a tricycle layout, they'd have to expand the fuselage laterally, making it much wider. An alternative was to put the main landing gears in a tandem configuration similar to the later B-52 and just fit much smaller outrigger wheels under the engine pods. And that brings me to the engines, and while we check those out, keep an eye out for how thin and flimsy the wing looks, especially if you've seen my B-36 video to compare the two. Powered by 6 General Electric J-47 turbojets, creating around 7,600 foot-pounds of thrust each. Of interest, they were attached via pylons rather than integrated into the wings like most other aircraft of that era, and that allows for easier maintenance, replacement, and if there was a catastrophic failure, then they were less likely to damage the rest of the wing. And this object here is an external fuel tank. In fact, as the wings were so thin as they prioritised minimising drag, they didn't store any fuel inside of them, so otherwise the fuel was all inside the fuselage. And they were massive self-sealing tanks. In fact, it carried 17,000 gallons, which was over 3 times what the B-29 carried. Therefore, the co-pilot would have been busy managing the fuel trim as to maintain the centre of gravity. As these are very early jet engines, they were very slow in responding to throttle input. In fact, they would take up to 20 seconds from idle to full throttle. So when they were descending to land, they would actually keep the throttles on medium power just in case they needed to go around. But to actually slow them while they were still in the air, they would open up a small parachute, enabling them to actually land the aircraft. In fact, it was so aerodynamic that they would also lower the rear landing gear to create drag and help descend the aircraft from a high altitude. Now, having said that though, the engines themselves weren't actually that powerful, so when taking off with a full load of fuel and bombs, they needed the assistance of 18 solid fuel JATO rockets, and that stands for Jet Assisted Takeoff. They were installed in the fuselage in this position here, and they would fire to help get the B-47 off the ground. In later models, such as this one, they actually attached 33 JATOs to a jettisonable split V or horse collar rack underneath, as you can see in this photo, and they would be dropped shortly after takeoff as to avoid carrying the unnecessary weight for the rest of the flight. They'd be attached to these red attachments you can see here. In this aircraft, the same area included electronic countermeasure equipment with air vents because the equipment will generate so much heat. Here's a shaft chute and battery. These holes in front are vents for the fuel tank, which, as I mentioned earlier, is located in the fuselage. We'll work our way back further aft, and there's another pod here that includes more electronic equipment. Now, I mentioned one of the drag chutes used to slow the aircraft to land, but there was also another large one that would open up once they actually landed, as reverse thrusting engines wasn't commonplace, nor were the aircraft brakes particularly advanced at the time. There was only one gun which had been removed from this example, and it was a twin 20mm M24A1 autocannon that was used remotely by the co-pilot. The reason for only one gun was that the performance was projected to be just as fast or faster than fighter jets, therefore they were only going to be attacked from behind. Above that is more electronic equipment, including a radar to help guide the gun and a receiver antenna to alert the crew of any enemy radar. This aircraft was an B-47E, with the E standing for Electronic Countermeasures, and it was designed to essentially distract enemy defenses, therefore allowing another aircraft to drop the nuclear bomb. In fact, they didn't even carry bombs, as the bomb compartment had more jamming equipment and 2 additional crew members inside it. Later on, these were actually used to simulate aggressor ECM during war games, and these were actually the last B-47s to fly, while the nuclear attack role was transferred to newer technology. But on the topic of the Bombay, standard models could carry 25,000 pounds of ordnance, including both conventional bombs and several nuclear bombs, including the Mark 41 thermonuclear bomb that you can see filmed here in Dayton, Ohio. This was the most powerful nuclear bomb made by the USA, with a maximum yield of 25,000 kilotons. For comparison's sake, the Hiroshima atomic bomb yielded just 15 kilotons, which is impressive yet terrifying at the same time. The next important part to mention is the wing. Now, during early design stages, they were working on a straight wing design, but as German wind tunnel research came to light as the Allies overran Berlin, the benefits of a swept wing design became obvious. As you can see here, the wings are also very thin, thus reducing drag, and they were also very flexible. In fact, the wingtip could flex up to 5 meters, and when it's sitting on the ground, it droops down far enough to hit me on the head. In early designs, the engines were actually all located on top of the fuselage, behind the bubble, and between the wings. This idea was to keep the wings clear and maximize their efficiency. But the Air Force considered having the engines so close to the fuselage and fuel tanks as a fire hazard, so they were moved to the wings. In the end, just over 2,000 of these were built, and it remained as a strategic bomber until 1965, when it was replaced by the newer B-52, although it continued in a reconnaissance role until 1969. Now, it never dropped a bomb in anger, although it did come under fire near or within Soviet airspace, and then the final flight was in 1977. While it's less famous than other bombers, the introduction of the swept wing design and having the engines on pods revolutionized aircraft design, and has continued to this day in both military and civilian large aircraft. Chuck Yeager said that it was such a good design that he had trouble landing it, as it just didn't want to descend, and Boeing test pilot Tex Johnson said that it was one of the most significant airplanes in the world, and I'd have to agree. Thanks for watching, like, comment, subscribe, etc., and check out my channel for many more similar tours around interesting aircraft.